When people think about holiday accidents, their minds usually drift towards the activities. Scuba diving beneath unfamiliar waters, speeding across the sea, or bungee jumping into a deep canyon. Those are the moments that feel risky. Almost nobody gives a second thought to the coach journey that gets them there. Yet, for 16 students returning from their 4-day Caribbean graduation trip in December 2025, their ride home would prove to be the most dangerous part of the entire holiday. The trip had been years in the making. From year 9 onwards, the students had paid into a savings fund, setting aside money little by little until they had saved enough. By the end of 2025, they had finished school, completed their examinations, and were ready to celebrate together before life carried them in different directions. The excursion was not organised by the school itself. Instead, the students and their families arranged the trip through a private travel company specialising in graduation trips called Senior Prom Fest. On Wednesday the 10th of December 2025, the coach left the cool mountain air of Antioquia and began the long drive north towards Colombia's Caribbean coast. For 4 days, the students enjoyed the beaches of Tolú and Coveñas. They swam in the warm Caribbean Sea, laughed together, posed for photographs, and made the kind of memories that only come when a chapter of life is drawing to a close. Those photographs still exist. Today they have become something altogether different. They preserve a moment when 16 young people stood on the threshold of adulthood, looking ahead to lives filled with possibility, unaware that the journey home would be their last. All too soon the holiday was over and it was time to head back home. They had been due to leave at 4 o'clock that afternoon. Instead, an armed strike by the guerrilla movement ELN, combined with mechanical problems affecting the coach, delayed their departure by almost 2 hours. Suitcases were packed for the last time and loaded into the luggage hold beneath the coach. Goodbyes were said to the Caribbean coast as the students settled into their seats for the long trip back to Bello. Some chatted about the week they had just enjoyed. Others scrolled through the photographs on their phones, reliving the memories almost as quickly as they had been made. It was an overnight journey of more than 8 hours, carrying them south through Colombia's changing landscape. Unfortunately, the air conditioning had failed, leaving the interior uncomfortably hot for much of the trip, and so they had stopped twice to replenish drinks before heading out on the final leg. As the hours passed, conversations became quieter. The glow from mobile phones gradually disappeared. Heads rested against windows, hoodies became makeshift pillows, and one by one the students drifted off to sleep. By the early hours of Sunday the 14th of December, the drive was almost over. Home was no longer hundreds of miles away. Parents would be expecting text messages to say they were nearly there. At around 2 a.m. that morning, the coach was travelling along the winding Remedios-Zaragoza road near a rural area known as El Chispero. The road clung to the mountainside, twisting through steep terrain where there was little room for error. Then, for reasons that have never been conclusively established, the coach left the carriageway. Witness marks later show the coach scraping along the crash barrier and then mounting it. For a few terrifying moments it rode along the top of the barrier before finally tipping over the edge and disappearing down the mountainside. The descent was violent. The coach overturned repeatedly as it crashed through trees and undergrowth, then finally coming to rest at the bottom of the ravine. For those inside, there was little warning and almost no time to react. When the wreckage finally came to rest, an eerie silence settled over the ravine. One survivor later recalled that all he could hear was the sound of soil and dust settling around him. Then, gradually, voices began to break the silence as the survivors called out to one another, trying to discover who was still alive. The coach lay more than 60 metres below the road, broken apart among the rocks and vegetation. Some of those on board had been trapped inside the wreckage, while others had been thrown clear as it tumbled down the mountainside. Those who remained conscious found themselves stranded on the floor of a steep ravine in the darkness before dawn. The road remained far above them, but through the trees they could see the distant lights of vehicles passing overhead, their drivers unaware that anything had happened. Mobile phone signals were non-existent, and there was no way of knowing whether anyone had even seen the crash. They remained at the site for over an hour, but there was no sign of any rescue. One of the survivors was 18-year-old David Rua. Injured in the crash, he realized that if help was going to arrive quickly, someone had to reach the road. With only one shoe remaining and a damaged mobile phone, whose torch still worked, he began climbing the steep mountainside towards the lights of passing vehicles above. Nearly an hour later, he reached the road. He saw a truck. David desperately signalled for him to stop and explained that a coach had gone over the mountainside. The driver, Freddie Salazar, handed over his mobile phone and then got to work helping with the rescue. Word spread quickly through the surrounding area. Local residents were among the first to reach the scene, scrambling down the difficult slope with little thought for their own safety. Together with the first firefighters, police officers and medical teams to arrive, they began the painstaking task of reaching the injured and carrying survivors back up the unforgiving hillside. It was a rescue made all the more difficult by the remoteness of the location. The terrain was so steep that rescue teams had to descend on ropes before they could even reach the coach. Every casualty then had to be brought back up the mountainside by hand. By the time the rescue operation was complete, 17 people had lost their lives. 16 were students from Liceo Antioqueño. The 17th was the coach driver. 22 others survived, many with life-changing injuries. As families across Antioquia waited for news of their loved ones, investigators were already beginning the painstaking task of understanding how such a devastating crash could have happened. Every possibility had to be considered. They examined the driver's hours, the condition of the coach, the steep mountain highway, and whether fatigue, mechanical failure, or the road itself had played a role. Survivor testimony, vehicle data, and detailed forensic examinations would all help piece together the final moments of the journey. As the investigation progressed, however, attention increasingly shifted away from the final seconds before the crash and towards the condition of the coach itself. In the days that followed, survivors and victims' families made a series of troubling allegations. Among them were claims that the coach had been travelling on bald tyres and that it had suffered mechanical problems long before the crash. Those concerns soon became part of the official investigation. The company responsible for operating the coach came under scrutiny, while the Automotive Inspection Centre that had certified the vehicle as roadworthy was suspended. Authorities alleged that inspection results had been altered and that the coach should never have been approved to carry passengers. What had first appeared to be a straightforward investigation into driver fatigue had evolved into a much broader examination of maintenance, vehicle inspections, and the responsibilities of those entrusted with carrying passengers safely. As investigators worked to determine why the coach had left the road, another disturbing story began to emerge. Colombian news reports revealed that looters had entered the crash site in the aftermath of the disaster and removed personal belongings from the wreckage. Mobile phones, wallets, clothing and other possessions belonging to the victims were reported missing, depriving many families of the few remaining items that connected them to their loved ones. For relatives already struggling to come to terms with their loss, the reports added a further layer of heartbreak. The tragedy had claimed 17 lives, and now even the victims' personal belongings had become the target of those willing to exploit the chaos for their own gain. The response from the authorities came quickly. Colombia's Superintendencia de Transporte suspended the operating license of Precolombia, the company that had provided the coach, while also taking action against the Automotive Inspection Centre responsible for certifying the vehicle as roadworthy. Investigators alleged that inspection records had been manipulated and that serious safety deficiencies had been overlooked. The Attorney General's office also launched a criminal investigation to determine whether negligence had contributed to the deaths of the 17 victims. For the families, however, legal proceedings were only one part of the battle. They wanted answers, accountability, and reassurance that no other group of young people would be placed on a coach in the same condition. In the months that followed, parents of the victims became determined campaigners. They organised demonstrations, gave television interviews, and demanded that those responsible be held to account. Many believed the tragedy had not been an unavoidable accident, but the result of failures that should never have been allowed to happen. The investigation is still ongoing. These young people had spent years saving for their graduation trip before heading off into adult life. It should have been one of the happiest memories they ever made. Instead, it became one that Colombia will never forget. Now, when my partner and I have been on holiday, we've been on a couple of coach trips that have gone up really steep and narrow, windy mountain roads, and I can tell you it's very scary. But at that time we didn't even think about the condition of the coach. Perhaps we will in future. Despite the nature of this tragedy, I hope you appreciated the way the information was presented. I'll see you on the next one, and I'll wish you bye-bye for now.